supposed to be here. You don't belong here. It's not real, none of it. It needs to end. The suffering must end. We're not really here. We're not really talking. The dream became a nightmare. It has to end. It just has to.
I have a very specific memory tied to this section in Fallout 3. I was sitting in my room, still living with my parents at 18. I just started college and I was playing Fallout 3 for the very first time, years after it had released and had long since been irrelevant in the mainstream gaming conversation. The previous year, when I turned 17, I had bought Oblivion on my own, as it was ludicrously cheap, and I was finally old enough to buy games on my own. And I wanted to continue broadening my gaming horizons with Fallout 3 after I had enjoyed the experience of Oblivion. My mom knocked on my door for some reason or another and saw this strange, goofy-looking black and white game, and was naturally curious about what I was playing, at which point I had to explain not just Fallout 3, but what was happening in the game. Because it doesn't give enough context to simply describe Fallout 3 in this case, an open-world RPG that takes place in a post-apocalyptic Washington, D.C., where you, as the main character, are tasked with finding your father and saving the wasteland while navigating a series of moral choices that will determine your outcomes. None of that describes what's happening here. In this particularly memorable section, the player is inside a simulation of an idyllic 1950s town being controlled by a sociopath who's trapped all the other Vault Dwellers, represented in this synthetic reality as happy, blissfully ignorant civilians going about their lives. The simulation's master, Dr. Braun, takes the guise of an unsuspecting child, tormenting the various civilians trapped in their virtual reality pods outside the simulation, and therefore inside Tranquility Lane. In the traditional style of Bethesda RPGs, they go about their automated path, stopping every so often to sit or chat with another NPC to give the vague illusion of sentience. But in this sadistic simulation, there's something more sinister about the hollow motions the digital dolls are put through. Something in this world inside a world makes their ineffectual routines seem even more pointless, as if they might be wandering back and forth forever, caught in these loops, never knowing how pointless it all is, if not for the player's involvement.
In 1981, French philosopher Jean Baudrillard published Simulacra and Simulation, a philosophical diatribe that asserted humans now live in a constant simulation, not a computer simulation, but a constant state of experience by proxy, composed of simulacra. Baudrillard's definition of simulacra is anything that is a copy depicting something that had no original or for which the original no longer exists. He surmises that in pre-modern times, we had access to more genuine, original copies of things that hadn't yet been run through several modern iterations of marketing, consumer culture, advertisement, and therefore the effects those things have on art, news, or our ideas had not been realized yet. But we live in a postmodern world. And in the postmodern world, we all exist in a space of hyperreality, where the simulacra, or the copies of things, are what we accept as the real deal.
Over time, these copies lose their meaning, both from being passed down and intentionally warped, until the original ideas don't remain, but what we perceive of the idea, or what we are told the idea represents, is still present. And these copies can take many forms for many purposes. For example, if you take Baudrillard's original essays to be an original copy, a literal copy of his own original work, then you can draw a line between these ideas and The Matrix, a film that revolves around a controlled synthetic reality and directly references his work. But The Matrix isn't just a copy of Baudrillard, it's also a copy of other pieces of media and philosophy that worked upon its creators. There is no original for The Matrix. It's an amalgamation of ideas that have been processed and reprocessed for consumption. Yet, in the end, the result is pure simulacra, a passive experience with no relationship to reality. Simply even referencing The Matrix as a cultural touchstone to explain Baudrillard proves him right. And here we find hyper-reality, where we consider the copied symbols to be as worthwhile as the original, or more so. For example, you probably watched The Matrix, but how many people who did also read Baudrillard on Simulacra?
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can see, what you can smell, what you can taste, then real is simply electrical impulses interpreted by your brain.
And so it continues, where we take a constant line of steps further and further from any of the original ideas until these hyper-real ideas are collapsing upon themselves, but mere references to the copies are enough to elicit emotion. Signals in the brain. I give you The Matrix Online. It is an online game that was a simulation of life inside of a film franchise that revolves around a simulation of life inside of a computer world. This is one spoke on the hyperreality wheel, where the copies copy the copies. Another example is the internet culture of red pilling, which most often consists of using iconography and terms from the Matrix franchise to justify various conspiracy theories, which are, again, taken as real despite no basis in actual experience. These conspiracies then form what the theorists have been conditioned to believe is reality. I've spoken before about how QAnon conspiracies are so often similar to action movies, featuring simple heroes and villains with dastardly motives and easy, often violent and entertaining solutions. This is why. Baudrillard's postulations were also heavily influenced by Marxist theorist Guy Debord, particularly Debord's work Society of the Spectacle. Debord defined spectacle not just as these symbols, images, media, games, distractions we're surrounded by and surround ourselves with, but as, quote, a social relation between people that is mediated through images, the relations we form to one another through passive consumption. In society, Debord asserts that through consumptive capitalism, we are more fixed by symbols and spectacle than reality. We would rather have something be exciting than have it be true or real. And eventually, because of the layers of abstraction, of focusing on spectacle above meaning or reality, the idea of meaning itself breaks down. And because it's not just personal interpretation of these images that matter, but social relation based on those images, so also interpersonal meaning is bound to break down as well. The world will begin to feel less genuine, less real, more cynical, even as our own definitions of what those words mean begin to blur. I'll link some videos by the channel Plastic Pills down below that explain some of these philosophical concepts more in depth with examples, so if I'm not doing a good job, go check out those videos. They seem a lot more qualified than me. I just read some books sometimes, and sometimes I put those books into YouTube videos. I bet all of this is pretty confusing, huh? All these aspects combine to form what Baudrillard refers to as a code, a series of interconnected systems that work to create what we essentially accept as reality. And because of these copies upon copies upon copies, society has continued to experience a collective loss of meaning. We created art, literature, community to communicate, to live, to express. And we've constructed around us an entire system to ensure that in our modernized world, none of it feels genuine.
In the postmodern world of hyperreality, it doesn't matter what's real, but what we perceive the message to be. It is a world of haunted dead. Also, side note, do you ever think about why conservatives and liberals shake so much in their boots at the mere mention of Marxist philosophy, or any analysis that builds upon Marx and Engels' original work? Why might they not want you to think about the Society of the Spectacle or the Simulacrum? It's something to chew on.
It would be over a decade before I'd revisit Fallout 3 to any considerable degree, replaying the game and finally getting to the various DLC missions after the well-received Amazon franchise adaptation hit the internet. And when I reached this particular point, I was overcome with a strange wave of nostalgia, not just for a time in my own life, but a recognition of something else entirely, the way so many other people fantasize about an American ideal fantasy that, like this false reality inside the game, never actually existed. Within my nostalgia for a specific moment and that inevitable urge to return to that moment was also an urge to return to a time where I personally didn't have to deal with this dumbass return shit on my Twitter feed all day.
Riding with my gal beside me, I'm as happy as can be.
Your fathers, they built this world on monogamy. I think of Bach, I think of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien.
Immigration without assimilation is invasion.
And you can always spot those communities because they're the ones that are the most dysfunctional, the filthiest, most destitute, and crime-ridden places in the country.
There can be, a Christian man can be looking to date, and proportionally, there would be more eligible Christian women that he could date 50 years ago than today.
The problem that we keep running into is that there are simply not enough godly, submissive, Christian, modest women. There seem to be far more men who are suited for Christian marriage than there are women.
Parts of America, it's actually becoming more religious, and I think that has to do with a lot of values changing in American society, where people are confused and kind of scared of what's going on, so they're going back to the church, which gives them a foundation for beliefs that they have held true throughout the last couple hundred years.
We basically turned off all immigration in the 1940s and 50s. We had like net zero immigration for almost 15 years. Most people don't even know that. So we had Ellis Island in the early 1900s, and then we turned on the guzzle of immigration. But let's be honest, for 40 years, we have tried this mass immigration project for the last 40 years. Has it worked? Are we a more connected country? Have middle-class wages kept up? Look at the material data. Has immigration enriched the well-being of the United States of America, especially the last 5 or 6 years?
It is one of the most racist, degenerate, welfare-ridden, rat-infested, truly rat-infested hellscapes I have ever witnessed in my life.
You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia.
Which is the demographic trend, where whites are trending towards extinction in the United States. Like that's the way it's headed. And then the other part of the story is the veil of silence around this issue, the wall that is erected around it. And I know you're going to say, well, you just read a story about it, so there's not a silence. Yeah, they can report on it. So you report and you celebrate diversity, and then you just move on. We don't talk about it. We don't think much about it, and that's it. You aren't allowed to talk much about it. You certainly can't be concerned about it.
One of the prevailing modern inventions of American conservatism is this kind of fabricated past, a nostalgia for a time and place that only sort of resembled an actual time and place in American history. It's fitting that so many posts in the genre have to rely on AI, giving just a vaguely recognizable shape that is as fabricated as it is based in anything anybody's ever experienced. And I won't actually be talking that much about AI because I'm writing another analytical essay on it, and this video is going to be kind of already all over the place. That's not to say that this is a new phenomenon. Authoritarian and reactionary states have used an idealized past national identity for as long as people have been saying back in my day. But the chintzy, saccharine Norman Rockwell painting ideal of American life, of returning to nebulous Saturday Evening Post-style tradition, of yearning for a time of greater social and economic stability and mobility, are unique to America in this particular way, in this particular moment. There's a lot to unpack about why the right-wing, and particularly the alt-right, are drawn to this imagery, but most of it is highly aesthetic. It's surface level, and so it's easy to pathologize based mostly on the trends we see and hear around us. In a society where people feel there's less economic opportunity, less of a chance than ever for young people to own a house, to have a white picket fence, 2 kids, a wife, and a dog, in a stable situation with a college degree, it makes basic sense to hunger for a time when all those things were feasible under full-time working conditions. When we've all grown up hearing stories of our grandparents working minimum wage jobs, yet owning a house and 2 cars, yeah, that sounds like a paradise compared to the gig economy hell we're several circles deep into by now, beckoned ever deeper by our impish Virgil, played by tech oligarchs and morally detached sociopaths. And then consider the utility of this idealized time as a propaganda tool, which is to say, convincing predominantly young people that a time they know little about, remain uneducated on the realities of, and has easily identifiable aesthetics, plays very well into convincing those same people that it was additionally a great time because of more white people, higher birth rates, look at how nobody had depression, there were no microplastics. By affixing an idealized version of this time, a false nostalgia, to their ignorance, you're easier able to weaponize that ignorance into conviction and belief. They weren't around to know the problems we had back then and how people were affected, so yeah, I can see why this yearning for a time decades removed from themselves holds appeal. It doesn't matter that these narratives directly counteract the facts we know, decades of academic study of history and the people who were there. After World War II, America hit an economic boom going into the Cold War. But the massive influx of returning men who saw combat faced issues that would have decades of repercussions. Because of the social standards for masculinity at the time, men who came back from the war with PTSD, many of whom were still teenagers when they had been killing other people, rarely talked about their issues. It wasn't uncommon to bury traumas in alcoholism or addiction and family abuse. From a 2015 Washington Post article interviewing surviving World War II vets that had lived with their trauma for decades. Quote, "They talked of night terrors, heavy drinking, survivor's guilt, depression, exaggerated startle responses, profound and lingering sadness. The symptoms were familiar to the world by then, but post-traumatic stress disorder, the diagnosis that came into being in 1980, was widely assumed to be unique to veterans of Vietnam. Bad war, bad outcome, bad after effects, is the way historian Thomas Childers put it. Of all the men and women who served in the armed forces during World War II, less than 6%, about 850,000, are still alive according to the Department of Veterans Affairs. World War II vets die at a rate of 492 a day. Before it's too late, we ought to reach beyond the nostalgia and myth and embrace the truth of war and the greatest generation. Bad war, good war, for those who fight, it's all the same. Means death, disfigurement, and horrors no human heart is equipped to bear. Quote, when we got out, you couldn't talk about things like that. Otis Mackey told me in his East Texas living room. Quote, you held it all in. I didn't want to take it to my family. If you say anything, people wouldn't believe half of what you say anyway. He was rocking furiously, faster and faster, speaking of his first day in combat, when his best friend was shot through the neck and killed, and the day he watched fellow soldiers dismembered by landmines. The leg with the combat boot and all, I had to duck, he told me. I seen it coming at me, I just ducked, and McGee's leg went flying right by my head. That has to be one of my guilty points, because I was right there ready to step on that mine. I never could figure out why it was him and not me. Mackey drank heavily when he returned to Texas and worked 3 jobs as a machinist, so he was too tired to remember his dreams at night. Quote, I don't know why my wife even stayed with me, he said. Mental health care wasn't a thing like we had today. People, especially women, would just be thrown into asylums and mental institutions for any old reason. And while plenty of trolls might be making soy faces at the idea of seeing anyone they see as deserving being institutionalized, the odds are plenty of the people who spend their days harassing strangers online, spreading conspiracy theories, gooning, and wallowing in their depression would be the first ones to be admitted. And if you didn't want to be admitted to a medical system that treated everything with a blunt and often inhumane approach, you would simply bottle up your feelings, literally. People spent whole lives resenting their wives, families, husbands, siblings, yet stuffing those feelings down with alcohol and other vices. Why is divorce so high compared to past generations? Because people don't want to spend their lives in miserable, loveless relationships growing more bitter towards one another simply because other people expect them to. And this isn't even touching upon the untold amounts of abuse, both in the household and elsewhere, that went completely unimpeded because of the social contract of the day. In a time where corporal punishment was considered the norm, it was a lot easier for someone to beat their kids, harass their spouse, and worse things I don't need to or want to go into here. While everyone from neighbors to teachers to their Sunday congregations just turned their heads because it wasn't their business. The realities about this 1950s period is that it was a time saturated with social anxiety, caught between an industrial boom of World War II and the gestating civil rights, anti-war, and free love movements of the 60s. And this anxiety was only cemented by toxic attitudes about masculinity that did demonstrable harm to entire generations of people, men included. PTSD wouldn't even become an accepted medical diagnosis until 1980, and many of the World War II veterans who struggled with PTSD wouldn't even receive recognition of treatment until the 1990s, decades after they had bottled it up and relied on varieties of unhealthy coping mechanisms, inflicting untold psychological damage on themselves or their families and friends. And that's just talking about interpersonal life for one section of people, though those being the white male soldiers who came back from the war. All that shit, best case scenario for the people who the entire era basically bent over backwards to accommodate. If you weren't in that specific combination of demographics, you were probably worse off. The 50s were also the beginning of the modern intelligence apparatus, and amid growing tensions with the Soviet Union following World War II, was a time flooded with propaganda. Famously, the phrase "In God We Trust" was added to paper money in 1955, and the bill's creator famously said, "When imperialistic and materialistic communism seeks to attack and destroy freedom, we should continually look for ways to strengthen the foundations of our freedom," equating, of course, nationalism and religiosity. And if I got into the myriad conspiracies and also proven experiments and measures to propagandize, manipulate, and otherwise control the US civilian population, we'd be here all day. It's important to remember that the US government has a long history of lying, experimenting, manipulating, and then will admit to it in places like declassified MKUltra files and still expect you to think, well, my government wouldn't do that. This is what they were doing at the time with the tools they had. What the fuck do you think they're doing now? When we have the facts and accounts from the time, when we actually look at what life was realistically like, divorced from the aspirational nirvana reactionary pundits want to make it seem like, it becomes clear that the 1950s weren't a unique decade. It wasn't an exceptional time to be an American, so much as it was an exceptionally American time, which is to say commerce and capital are remembered more fondly than the people who had to suffer for it to happen. On that note, do you ever notice how this idealized version of the 1950s seems to resemble a lot of advertisements from the time? Close-knit, happy families engaging in traditional roles, smiling wide behind their picket fences. Even now, the Nazi propaganda yearning for those good old days seems ripped straight from 1950s magazine advertisements. Our idea about what life was like isn't based on reading diaries, documents, or verifiable accounts. They're based on advertisements. Kind of makes you wonder how many people's lives in the 1950s ever actually resembled this. This revisionist history doesn't just apply to a rosy 1950s shtick, by the way. I'd say that revised history that's taken as genuine truth is as much a part of the American history as actual American history. Nostalgia, essentially, that's been sold to us, rather than based in any genuine experience. A simulacra. This isn't our nostalgia. Our nostalgia, a sense for attachment to a time or place we're fond of, isn't real. And often, it's an advertisement for a world that didn't happen. For example, we know that historically a ton of cowboys were people of color, former slaves, Latinos, and more. Yet because of decades of centering white faces as the representation of the Old West in media, people believe that fictional representations are as genuine as any history class, where they also, coincidentally, wouldn't learn anything to counteract the blatant media propaganda. And as a result, you get grown-ass people who have knee-jerk reactions to seeing black people in westerns, claiming it as DEI or woke. So when I revisited this section of Fallout, it reminded me of that very same kind of false nostalgia, but even more reminded me of how our own nostalgia, our very concept of what we reference to one another and feel emotional investment in, are, like the unwitting sleepers inhabiting Tranquility Lane, beamed directly into our heads, and we've grown so used to it that we don't even question it anymore. And that's assuming we ever questioned it, considering how normalized it is. Fallout as a franchise is uniquely suited to this critical analysis. A satire of 1950s Atom Age American paranoia, each game, despite the varying degrees of dedication to the original satire, remained plastered with the now recognizable iconography of the in-universe advertisements. The Vault Tech Company, Sunset Sarsaparilla, Fancy Lad Snack Cakes, Pip-Boy, and of course Nuka-Cola, all various pastiches or references to real-life products. Framed within the product that is the Fallout franchise, these marketing strategies take on life outside of those confines. The iconography of the franchise's satirical products are often the most recognizable products sold to real consumers.
Pip-Boy 3000 Mark V replica based on the TV show that Lucy wears, right?
Absolutely. 100% based on it, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
The iconography is what's being sold, not the satire, not the original intent of the artwork. It's the idea of recognizing something, completely detached from an intended meaning. But so what? That's most things with franchises, right? And it has been for decades. Look at this product based on a satirical franchise. It's made just like it would have been in the universe where mass commercialization and the corruption of capital are major themes, but you can buy it in real life.
I'd buy that for $1.
The mass-produced toy line boom of the 80s and 90s are other great examples of the detachment of the meaning of the original art from the product being sold, where companies would just make shows with cheap animation and sell toys with cheap and recycled designs. It was just an endless sea of identical day-glow packages destined for landfills and the quickest, easiest profits manageable. And now, many of those franchises are considered culturally sacrosanct. It's designed this way. The American Psychological Association has noted that since the 1970s and the astronomical rise of children with access to TVs, advertising budgets aimed specifically at kids have exploded to $12 billion, and that was from a study in 2004, before the rise of mobile phones and the calcification of social media into every part of our lives, and especially targeting kids. These are things we have known. There are studies on these issues, but with how tangential they can be, with how many forces are working upon us, and everything bombarding our brains at all times, it's nearly impossible to grasp the totality of how we've been formed by consumer culture. In less than 20 years, we've gone from a culture that spends billions on advertising to kids to a culture where we probably can't even accurately estimate how much is spent on that same goal across every social media platform, spam email generator, drop shipping Instagram ad, customized t-shirt Facebook pop-up, and an untold number of other specifically targeted ads. It's no surprise that advertising is effective at making kids more materialistic, but also impacts their self-perception and sense of self-worth. Which shouldn't be surprising because for about as long as companies have been able to beam images to American TV sets, that has been the explicit goal. Again, we have studies from the 60s and 70s that talk about these things. We've known. Here are publications talking about the psychological effects of advertisements on women's body images. From the 1970s, so many ideas about American culture are sold to us as advertisements. The beauty and purity of youth, the virility and achievement of masculinity, the tender nature of families. We take these ideas and depictions for granted, along with the foregone conclusion that they're aspirational, and most people just never ask why. Advertisements are so deeply embedded into the flesh of American life, which I need to remind people they're just hollow shells meant only to sell products, to create recognition in a population and prey on the most basic aspects of our id and ego. These ads are such a part of us that changing them to better represent social standards causes a fervor because of people's nostalgia for the standards of life they've presented. When you see people getting mad about an ad depicting a race-mixed family or a gay couple instead of the default white straight family, it's taken as offensive. Is it because the people watching an outrage feel that somehow, by depicting someone else in an idealized life with a family and home big enough for social functions, that they've been deprived of the place in society themselves? That they've been robbed of the aspirational goals they were sold in this idealized past when things were simpler for them? Now, what are the odds anyone's life even looks like this advertisement, even for white people, used to seeing themselves so overly represented? I've been white for a while, most of my life in fact, and my life has never resembled the idyllic standards sold everywhere from cough medicine to food to the latest gadgets. People would rather be outraged by the very idea of their nostalgia for these non-existent times and places being changed to sell more products to more people rather than the advertisements themselves surrounding us our entire lives as carrots on a string. Always an ideal, just out of reach, something you might be able to earn if you just keep trying a little harder. Oh, you thought that cologne ad was for you? You thought the car ad with Matthew McConaughey was aimed at your demographic? Nah, you have the lowest tier of Hulu or Netflix, and some algorithm served you an ad for a car you'll never be able to afford or a luxury watch or vacation you have to save up several years for. Now, please go back to draining your underpaid checking account with Uber Eats because who can afford a car? And you're tired after working a 12-hour shift, but you got to do it again tomorrow because otherwise, how will you pay for that Mercedes? We don't think about what ads and nostalgia mean to us in terms of our place in culture because we've been taught to see them as culture itself. From the earliest playground size you choose on either PlayStation or Nintendo, Harry Potter or Aragorn, G.I. Joe or Ninja Turtles, Star Wars or Star Trek, we've been taught that the things we like define us, and we're encouraged to base our identities around things. We're encouraged to dress up as characters we like well into adulthood. We're given hashtags and even fake non-holidays, Mario Day, Star Wars Day, Alien Day. Advertisements are given places in our lives, not freely by us, by the way. We are simply expected to acquiesce. Icons, symbols, nostalgia. Think back to the Fallout products meant to replicate the satirical over-commercialization of the games. The idea of a recognition of a product is enough for it to be packaged and sold divorcing any meaning from the original intent of the art itself. We are even sold nostalgia for these advertisements now, with advertisements often referencing others or older cultural touchstones for no reason aside from being a reference. Which brings me to the question that I'll be focusing on for the rest of this essay. Who is this for? Actually, that's a bit too easy, so instead, I'll be focusing on the answer, which is that it's for anyone young enough to be sat in front of a screen. And that emphasis on youth is likely why we've seen the last few decades give birth to an all-American reactionary phenomenon, the eternal man-child.
To most, youth is seen as a sinister currency. You're constantly encouraged to use it, to have fun, to live it up. Yet if you don't use it, it seems waiting to be used by someone else. That new generation is always nipping at your heels. One day, you'll be old, and so will your music, the movies you saw, the books you read, the games you played, all replaced by not a new generation of people, but a new generation of consumption, of revitalized products. Ninja Turtles is back. Masters of the Universe has a new reboot. There are 20 new Star Wars projects on the way. Regardless of the individual quality of these pieces of media, which can vary, the machine will keep resetting to run its course again and again. Kafka would have the craziest love-hate relationship with American consumer society if he were still around. And so we fear getting older. But why do we feel that way? Is it a natural fear of the unknowable end, that nobody can be sure of what truly awaits when that final breath escapes after gestating for a lifetime? Is it merely an extension of growing old and wearied by the world? Or is it the world itself that is growing more weary instead of any one person? Has the idea of age and the corrosion it brings been hammered into us with nearly every advertisement we've seen since childhood? The ideas of happiness and youth, of fitness when we were younger, of needing more products as we get older to grasp back some ghost of a world that we feel is leaving us behind. But again, think back to all of these advertisements we've seen and how few of them actually resemble your life, regardless of how you fall into the intended demographics of gender, race, or religion represented. It's a non-stop barrage of conflicting ideas that we don't question because any antagonism towards the advertisements we're served is wrung from us entirely by the ideas these advertisements themselves represent. That there's a status quo to aim for, and that status quo isn't interested in questioning how it evolved, let alone the harm it's doing. And it's not interested in you questioning that either.
What is that feeling? It's not quite nostalgia. It's something else, something more than merely recollecting, but not as much as nostalgia. Take another vacation if you can afford it. Remember times with friends because of a refreshing beverage. That sounds good on a hot summer day. The summers have been getting hotter, haven't they? We think the same things every year, yet rarely do we feel any change coming. Except for the products bearing the labels, all new, fresh, exciting, must-have, top-of-the-line, cutting-edge, state-of-the-art. Why do so many young people fear turning 30? As more Gen Z and Alpha have spent the years on their phones practically playing Fruit Ninja and Roblox in the womb for how familiar kids are with touchscreens, we've seen several fascinating attitudes emerge about youth, and maybe none more fascinating than how social media judges its end. Part of it seems to be the fear of having not achieved or not produced enough. Put aside for a moment the Facebook inspirational memes about how Oprah didn't achieve anything until she was 45, and instead contemplate where we get those ideas about productivity. What I want you to consider is, where do we get our ideas of who and what we should be by a certain point in life? If you've been following with me so far, you've probably seen where I'm going, but stick with me a little longer. Speaking personally, I don't get these ideas from my social circle, where most people around my age are, to varying degrees, struggling with the same issues such as inflation, housing, medical care, affordable transportation, and so on. It's not my family, who all face their own turbulent 20s. I don't know anybody who went into their 30s with a family, kids, investment portfolio, and a 2-car garage. I don't know anybody who has those things. Instead, I look at the ideas we've been sold of what we should have or what we deserve. The same kind of advertisements we've been sold since the crib, a phenomenon that's only continued its plague-like spread as social media companies embrace a new generation every year, compiling an exhaustive database of personal data that is used, bought, and sold without your knowledge and permission to better tailor advertisements to you personally. And that's entirely before considering recent developments like the government partnership of Palantir.
I'd like to share a revelation that I've had during my time here. It came to me when I tried to classify your species, and I realized that you're not actual mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment. But you humans do not. You move to an area, and you multiply till every natural resource is consumed, and the only way you can survive is to spread. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus.
It is plainly, by every definition I can think of, inhumane to reduce any one human to simple algorithms. That inhumanity is implied by our current system, and because we see it so often from the very beginning, we think nothing of it. It never crosses our mind instinctively that there might be something deeply wrong here. And as things like AI, monitoring civilians, and more are normalized and regulated, every subsequent generation will see this as simply normal. It's horrifying, but when viewed in the totality of how this advertising approach has affected generations, you can't argue with its effectiveness. We love mythologizing American exceptionalism, the idea that we, as Americans, are uniquely virtuous by nature of our good old-fashioned values and gumption, what some would call Judeo-Christian values. The national recognition of American individualism could be marketed best as a lone cowboy, probably brandishing a firearm or 2 dozen, and riding the plains to protect the innocent and punish the wicked. But for all the pulp fantasy of our history and the low-fat fads were sold, there really is no individual American in the system. We are all equally well-trained consumers, just falling into different algorithms of preferences. If you're an anti-left, anti-woke person hate-watching me right now, you might think, not me, I don't buy into woke DEI shit, only for you to go buy more games from the latest Steam sale you won't play, or more anime that would get you to buy more figures and posters for that anime. Someone else will probably think, well, not me, I don't buy into corporate Marvel slop, fight the system, down with capitalism. You might type in from an iPhone, listening to the latest Kendrick track from Universal just a few months after his appearance in the Super Bowl, the most talked about advertisement bacchanal of the year, every year. There is no escape. They locked the door behind you as soon as you're born. One minor boomerish fixation I've had for years now has been Little Golden Books. Little Golden Books, a staple in many children's lives for their affordability, uniform presentation, and focus on classic stories, is now merely another spoke in the ever-spinning wheel of franchise and nostalgia indoctrination. And me saying indoctrination might seem a little heavy-handed, but make no mistake, that's what's happening here. Why would we print a ton more books about talking bears or little engines that could? These books that teach very basic ideas to forming minds like kindness, sharing, or hard work, when we can instead deep fry those same stories in irony and franchises that those children will be loyal to their entire lives. The stories that have been passed down for generations in various forms because of the value we've decided they have culturally. Who cares when you can give them a story instead with Spider-Man? Products like this aren't just made as throwaway gifts for baby showers. They're long-term marketing investments. Disney wants the same kid reading the Black Panther Little Golden Book to be buying Black Panther Legos when they're 10, and a cool Black Panther statue when they're 30, taking their kids to see Black Panther 6 featuring an AI de-aged, completely CG model of Chadwick Boseman by the time they're 37. And then their kids will repeat the cycle. I mentioned that idea of the eternal man-child earlier, and this is really where it starts. We put so much emphasis on art that can barely be called art because it is easily digested goop. Yet the emphasis we put on it seems to grant these franchises a place of cultural deference and undeniable importance as the myths of our age. It's not just Marvel, by the way. You can buy a Little Golden Book of Star Wars, various Marvel properties, and of course, Alien. Yes, you can buy a Little Golden Book of Ridley Scott's R-rated 1979 sci-fi horror classic. Why? Is it to get kids started on R-rated sci-fi horror early? No, it's because parents or baby shower gift givers will spend $5 as a funny bit to buy a golden book that represents a franchise they recognize for a child that won't have any idea what a xenomorph is or who Amanda Ripley is for several years. Probably about 5 years, as it turns out, until they get to a point where they can play Fortnite. Or by then, I'm sure children will just play regular games like Clickers, where they have AI profiles play for them just as God Emperor Elon Musk intended. The idea of playing a game with a controller? Baby shit. It's just like that one scene in Back to the Future Part 2. Remember Back to the Future? Damn, those are good movies. One of the few 80s major franchises to emerge unscathed by the requel plague that sees constant churns of franchises that bring back a few legacy characters to continue their story while also passing the torch to a new generation, at least in terms of characters. What's actually happening here is getting a wider audience invested in the idea of a franchise so that they and their kids will invest and buy t-shirts that end up in thrift stores, mugs that go unused, and eventually random products that will inevitably end up in antique stores after that relative who thinks any franchise toy can be valuable kicks the bucket and nobody wants their collection of vintage Superman Returns merch. It's a continuation of the same slop faucet we unwittingly turn on when we think about that alien little golden book. It continues through the teenage demographic as games like Fortnite, Mortal Kombat, Call of Duty, and plenty more now are inundated with revered film, comic, and anime IP, regardless of how ill-fitting or grotesque the resulting amalgam might be. A few years back, I had a younger relative who was playing the game Broforce quietly in the corner of a family event. It's a silly little game where various send-ups of famous action heroes fight alongside each other in a pixel style. And while he enjoyed the game, he had no idea who the characters were parodies of. Later, I would show him the Terminator films, which were childhood favorites of mine. And he recognized Arnold's T-800 character not from the classic iconography of the film's poster or from watching the film, but from Broforce.
As of this year, we are crossing a pretty sizable milestone for this nostalgia mill. As of 2025, the generation born in 2012, the same year as Marvel's Avengers, the solidifying of the MCU into the culturally omnipresent juggernaut we all passively live with today, will become teenagers. And you can look at that movie, regardless of what you think personally of it, and basically chart a stagnation or ossification of American culture. We still have Funko Pops being made for every Marvel movie. Those movies have only grown more expensive and frequent and worse. DC tried their hand at the same cinematic universe game, and in that time period not only failed, but then rebooted it, and that newest iteration is here. And at this point, I don't know what part of any nostalgic reaction I have is genuine. Do I miss the way anything used to be? Did it just used to be better, or did I actually learn how sloppy things are in this moment? I might be more online and keyed into cultural conversations and topics than the average person, but I miss missing things.
And this line of thinking brought me to Star Wars and asking, what do I like about Star Wars? At a certain point, when you've done so much to expand exhaustively on a universe, it ceases to be a set of ideas or any focus on message or craft. It instead turns into an overall aesthetic. Now, you can still use that setting and aesthetic to tell good, impactful tales of daring do. Andor is a great example. You can play with the original style of Lucas's Western sci-fi mashup like the first season of The Mandalorian, but you won't have the same fire as the originals did because we've got them to compare anything new to. This won't stop the machine from churning, though, just in different forms. Similarly recognizable iconography. Look at this thing. It's like the thing you know, but it's also so different. Even the idea of setting good or even great art against these backdrops is nefarious. How many people will watch Andor and will like it so much they go, maybe I should give another 50 hours of my time on this planet to Disney and watch all the other Star Wars shows? And how many of them will buy a Funko Pop or a sweatshirt? Disney doesn't care that Andor is good beyond people thinking it's good and wanting more of the same vaguely Star Wars-shaped mold. And we can't talk about universes without the inevitable last resort of any writer's room, universes colliding. Because just when you thought, where do they take this thing next? As with the MCU, they take it just literally anywhere and everywhere that can be used to grab your attention. We should go back to where I think a lot of people overlooked a turning point in pop culture for this, where it all just kind of got worse, and that's Wreck-It Ralph. Now, at the time, it was a novelty to have these IP interacting, a calculated move to infuse nostalgia upon itself, winding multiple recognizable trademarks into each other. What's the point of it? Hype, moments, and aura, that's basically it. But because Americans are conditioned from our incubation sacks to not just invest money and time, but our emotions into product time after time after time after time, we've seen how inevitably profitable it is to just haphazardly slam some shit together on screen. You might find yourself wondering, what happened to Call of Duty? And that might be genuine nostalgia for a time when the game didn't look like this, but that kind of nostalgia keeps you buying the game every year, hooked on muscle memory, while this false nostalgia is what is selling these shit-ass new skins. And the end result of this human centipede of media is we now have shit like Deadpool and Wolverine, the profane antichrist of modern film.
Copies, referencing copies, and being branded as something new to the point where we now have the multiverse framework so that even failures to make cultural touchstones are now co-opted into the mass. The fact that something was made once or was a copy of something else is enough of a selling point now to copy it forever. Just shove shit in there. Fuck it. You kids like these old dog shit Fox movies, right? Y'all liked Elektra? No. Fuck you. Jennifer Garner was available, and Ben Affleck was asking us way too much to interrupt whatever he does on his days off. Probably sits there hugging a body pillow of Matt Damon. Except now we're at a point where it all wraps back around. Maybe there's something to examine in a media trend towards multiverses, towards a collective imagination of infinite worlds beyond our own, where we're there, but things are different in new and exciting ways. An earnest, honest idea that, like everything else, is sold to us through symbols and simulacra. Maybe out there in the universe we can see the things we once loved but outgrew live on without fear of reboot. Maybe there's a universe where George Lucas just made 3 great movies and every Target doesn't still feature shelves overstocked with exclusively at Target 8-bit Jar Jar Binks Funko Pops. I might have false nostalgia for a thing or a feeling that doesn't exist, but it sure does sound nice.
It might sound like I'm bringing all this up to be a bitch and be grumpy, but I'm honestly not. I fully acknowledge I myself am not above being occasionally slot-brained. I bought this Shadow the Hedgehog plushie when I took myself to go see the children's film Sonic the Hedgehog 3 because I was enamored with the idea of seeing my childhood hero when I was 6 years old, Shadow the Hedgehog, on the big screen. But how could that possibly be harmful? How is being excited for something bad? Why can't you just let people enjoy things? Enjoying things and letting people do so is the echoing refrain you'll probably hear whenever you criticize popular media, and almost especially if you actually have a good point to your criticism. And it's because these ideas about nostalgia are linked to the rising tide of idealistically perverted longing for an American time and place that never was, and also to that enjoyment, as in the enjoyment so many people seem to be using as a surrogate for genuine happiness and contentment with life. I'm not saying people can't genuinely enjoy these things, by the way. I have, and in some cases still do. What I'm observing is simply that when we see people say, let people enjoy things, they do it as a reflexive reaction to the idea of criticism, not the criticism being leveled itself. We don't like the things we've so closely tethered to our identities to be criticized, because for many, that feels like a personal slight. You might say, these are just big, dumb action movies. They're not that deep. And yes, I'd agree with you. I've made whole videos discussing how often these kinds of films go out of their way to avoid saying anything of substance, lest Disney be accused of having a spine. But as I've also shown, these media properties have proliferated far beyond the levels of those old westerns generations of Americans accepted as historical truth. The ideas that were once simply sold to us as an ideal, as marketing strategies, become calcified in the accepted narratives of tomorrow's radical movements as the ideal to strive for. Let us simply then stay distracted.
In the Tranquility Lane simulation, if you try to convince someone they're in a simulation, they'll just wave it off as crazy talk, as a wild conspiracy you've cooked up as a prank. Nobody wants to be told they're living wrong. Nobody likes being told what to do. We're told that it's our right as Americans to give any yellow-livered commie the finger while jets and an eagle fly overhead and Metallica plays in the background. Being American means you're supposed to be rebellious, independent, strong, not go with the flow, so buy Levi's, buy Ford, fuck anyone who doesn't like it, these colors don't run, love it or leave it. It's a powerfully American response to look at critique of culture and take offense, instead of simply considering new information or even the potential outcomes of what you're hearing. Tranquility Lane hits the 1950s faux nostalgia nail right on the head, not because of the insular, creepy town itself, but because nobody there wants to think for themselves. They want to go with the flow. They love doing what they're told to do. They love going through the same motions day in, day out, not expecting anything different, because it's comfortable to know what to expect, even when that familiarity is a lie. It's based on nothing but a Pavlovian response to what we're conditioned to recognize. And that's how a lot of modern Americans are. Especially the ones who like to idealize a time and place they only have a simulacra of nostalgia for. Every aspect of our lives is commoditized until we too take it upon ourselves to become commodities. And we will defend our right to be a cog in this machine because that's what being an American means. Define yourself not by what ideas you have, what you think of art, your own aspirations or feelings, but by the frameworks you are given to spill them all into. You are sold the idea of nostalgia, of recognition for artifacts of another time and place that most of the world has left behind. And an allegiance to that nostalgia, the nostalgia that was never really yours, is rewarded with the facade of community. That there are others out there just like you, who care about these things just like you. So that must mean they are worth caring about.
It's how you get people insisting that vapid entertainment like Stellar Blade is culturally important work, worth waging the Twitter equivalent of trench warfare over. It's why you have people insisting that a new iteration of something can ruin their childhood, because they don't actually have nostalgia for how they felt as a kid watching Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. They have manufactured a new, synthetic nostalgia for how it feels to think about what Star Wars used to make them feel.
Star Wars is dead, and it has been for a long, long time. It is a zombie franchise, a corpse with its remaining limbs hooked to strings, and its puppeteer is Kathleen Kennedy and her comrades at Lucasfilm, who have systematically destroyed the most financially lucrative movie intellectual property of all time.
Luke Skywalker went from legendary Jedi to a bitter old hermit who drinks milk from alien tits.
It was just so demoralizing to see in Last Jedi.
Star Wars was once a formative experience for whole generations of moviegoers, a landmark pop culture event that redefined what movies could be, that reshaped the landscape of cinema, and gave us characters and moments that still resonate almost half a century later.
There's something fundamentally wrong about taking somebody else's IP and ideas and corrupting them. It's pretty disgusting, frankly.
And it wasn't enough for Disney Star Wars to just kill Han and Luke. They had to desecrate their characters before doing so.
Star Wars is pretty dead. I don't even feel too inclined to be making videos. I just feel like Disney has just really, it's just beyond fatigue. It's like kind of a joke at this point.
It's why, despite seemingly endless bitching, they won't stop consuming the content. They're Star Wars fans, which for some reason means they'll dig through whatever has a brand name on it, regardless of whether they know they're going to probably like it or not. If they were actually nostalgic, they might keep a Luke Skywalker toy from their childhood around, pull out their old Empire VHS tape from time to time, but instead, we must show our love with things, not thoughts or feelings, not genuine connections or inspiration, but through content, through buying expensive adult toys, and not even the fun ones. We must speak the language the machine has taught to us, and that tongue is named consumption. We are consumers defined first and foremost by our appetites. And this isn't to say that you shouldn't enjoy things or that video games are a waste of time. Humans have evolved to play a social and interpersonal interaction. We have created art to bond our society, and anyone can still make art that is profound, important, and fresh. Except, I do miss when that art felt more common. Or maybe that's just nostalgia talking. Maybe I'm idealizing the mid and early aughts more as the aesthetics become marketable again. Maybe it's just easier to think of a time when I didn't have to think so hard about how I really feel and whether or not those feelings are mine or if they've been sold to me. Great art will always be here. Expression, contact, passion, communication. These are all the things that make humanity, but they're also all the things we watch being ground down by the machine day after day. Comfortable because that endless grinding churn is all we've ever known. It's comfortable to think of a time kind of like this one, except things are easier and better, and the problems we face aren't so terrifying. It's soothing to remember how things used to be, to steep in the simulacra and how it used to make us feel, or how we think we used to feel about it. But eventually, with so many simulations stacked one on top of the other, I wonder if we're not just going to forget what nostalgia really feels like, but what feeling really feels like. Hello, everybody, and thank you for sitting through this latest video essay of mine. If you followed my channel for a bit, you probably have noticed I don't do a lot of videos like this very often, mostly because they're not incendiary or incredibly political or political deep dives of one form or another. These kinds of videos tend to not get the views that will justify the time and effort I really want to take. That being said, I still want to continue trying, if nothing else, for videos like this. And if you couldn't tell, I put a lot of time, effort, and attention into nearly every aspect of this video. It is maybe one of the most finely tailored and authored videos I've done in a very long time. And like I mentioned, I have plans and already outlines and research ready to go on at least 2 other essays that are kind of in this vein as far as being philosophical explorations of the things that are kind of just around us every day. Ideally, if this video does well, I would like to turn it into a kind of thematic trilogy, but we will have to see where the reception is before that happens. That being said, it would be massively helpful if you left a comment down below giving me some feedback on this video. And of course, if you like my content, if you want to help with my other documentary work, I'm working on several other investigative projects, as I always am right now. If you've enjoyed any of my content, feel free to drop me a couple bucks at the Ko-Fi link down below, or you can join all the cool people that are scrolling across your screen right now. Come on over to the Patreon, there are links down below, and you can get Discord access and hang out with a bunch of other cool people and get exclusive looks at videos like this before they drop. With that being said, I hope this video was entertaining. I hope it gave a couple people something to think about. And if nothing else, I am happy with how it allowed me to flex some more creative muscles that I've been yearning to do for a while now. And I hope you enjoyed it. All that out of the way, have a good rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.